Thank you for coming. As you may or may not know, Brain Injury Australia runs a series of multi-year public education and awareness campaigns. Everything from the leading cause of death and disability in children, inflicted traumatic brain injury, sometimes called shaken baby syndrome, right through to the leading cause of traumatic brain injury across all age groups and external causes, falls. Not, dare I say, because there are more teenagers taking high dives off balconies at 2 a.m. on a Saturday after 45 rum and cokes. As the population ages, more old people fall over and land on their heads. In fact, the group in the population with the highest TBI incidence and death rates is the fastest growing section of the Australian population, those aged 85 years of age and over. If any of you have got ageing parents, you will know it doesn't take much of a head injury to do some really serious damage. One of those campaigns is in regards to people with a brain injury in the criminal justice system. As I think it says in the conference program, as many as 80% of adult prisoners report one or more head injuries with loss of consciousness. But ABI, acquired brain injury, runs often a poor second, if that, when compared to, say, the assessment and supports available, particularly in terms of offender rehabilitation for intellectual disability and autism spectrum disorder. So part of the purpose of today is to try and right that disparity with three excellent presenters, starting with Michelle McIntyre from Synapse. Please welcome Michelle.
Hi everyone. Thanks for that, Nick. I can't see the room, but I'm going to plough on assuming that you can all see me. So yeah, I'm a research fellow with Synapse Australia, and we're a national peak body for brain injury. And the work I'm talking about this afternoon is a project we did with Griffith University for the Department of Social Services, assessing the disability needs of Indigenous prisoners, or ADNIP. And it was a project that was looking at cognitive and other disabilities in Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander prisoners. So I'd firstly like to respectfully acknowledge traditional owners of the land that I'm on today here in Brisbane, and that's the Jagera and Turrbal peoples. I pay my respect to elders, knowledge holders and leaders, past, present and emerging. I also wanted to acknowledge the artwork that you can see on this PowerPoint was done by Auntie Lorraine Barlow. And Auntie Lorraine was our cultural steward for the ADNIP project, and she gave us permission to use this artwork of hers to symbolise the project. Wamu is the black worker ant whose tracks lead off in many directions, indicating the many different and complex paths we can follow in life. So because this project relates to the lives of Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander people, it was of course crucial that it reflected the perspectives and the knowledge and the voices of those people and communities. So cultural guidance and engagement were a very strong focus of the project. In this photo, you see Auntie Lorraine Barlow and Uncle Adrian Padmore, and they were our cultural stewards. And they've given me permission to report the ADNIP results today. So, yeah, the research team had included Indigenous people at all levels and at all stages, and that included a community consultation group, the CCG. They were a panel of respected and very knowledgeable Indigenous people. We also had local advocates and community facilitators who guided us to convene and run community consultations that we did all over Australia as part of the project. I'm now just going to show you a short video to hear from some of these people before I present the results.
I respectfully acknowledge the Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander peoples as the first inhabitants of Australia. I also acknowledge the traditional owners and custodians of this many lands and their continued connection to land, sea and community. I pay my respect to my elders, past, present and emerging, and I commit to the spirit of the meaningful reconciliation between Indigenous and non-Indigenous Australians. I also ask that our ancestors give us their blessings as I tell you today about the Assessing the Disability Needs of Indigenous Prisoners, or also the ADNIP project. We will hear from some of the cultural stewards and community facilitators who were involved with this project.
Ngadja, Janan Jigari Jigari Balagud Minam Barbaram Kaniel. I'm also known as Auntie Lorraine Barlow. I am Jalbrew of Yidinji Nation, North Queensland, and Lama Lama Nations, Cape York Peninsula. Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander people are so diverse, and the way we respond to each of the cultures very different. You know, they may say we're all the same, but we're not. So again, you had to understand the protocol involved of how to talk to them, how to sit, and how to have that dialogue. And if you didn't know, then you see the doors get shut.
My name is Uncle Adrian Padmore. I'm from up North Queensland. I'm from the Yidinji clan group that's around Yungaburra, Atherton, and on this project, the ADNEP project, I'm a community engagement officer, and in this project I also co-facilitated.
My name is Stephen Watson. I'm a Mununjali, Wanjaraburra, Birrigabba and Gungaloo man. I currently work in the Brisbane Murray Court and am a local ADNEP advocate for the Brisbane area. It's only through this grassroots consultation with our people that we will see appropriate activities and programs rolled out that will benefit our people in the long run.
My name's Dr. Leda Barnett. I'm a psychologist and I'm a research fellow with the Hopkins Centre at Griffith University. I'm a first Australian. My grandmother was a member of the Stolen Generation. So she was taken from Camberwell and she was sent across to the Karama orphanage in Townsville. So we don't actually know who our mob are. This project is able to provide recommendations for how Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander people who have got complex disabilities can actually be helped.
So I'm trusting that all worked. So just to give a bit of background to the project, it's of course becoming widely recognised that hidden disabilities like acquired brain injury, cognitive impairments, hearing loss, mental health disorders are high in prison populations. The 2016 COAG Prison to Work report found that these sort of disabilities often go undiagnosed in prisons. You might be familiar with the work of Eileen Baldry and her team at University of New South Wales. Found that Indigenous prisoners were particularly disadvantaged and experienced highly complex needs. So when these sort of things are missed or misunderstood in the prison system, as you can imagine, it can really disadvantage people. They haven't got the support they need to function in prison or to reintegrate back into the community. Things like finding work, complying with parole conditions become particularly challenging and make it more likely that people will go back to prison. An undiagnosed disability has been found as one of the high reason for the high recidivism, particularly for Indigenous people. So given the stats around Indigenous overrepresentation in prison, it's important to understand the needs of Indigenous prisoners with disabilities and to break this cycle of recidivism. So just broadly, the aims of the project were to look at the types of disability assessment tools that are used in Australian prisons to identify disability in Indigenous prisoners, and also how people are linked to supports in prison and at release. And then importantly, we also wanted to consult with community to hear solutions and preferred practices from Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander community stakeholders. And these solutions were what formed or informed our recommendations. The project, there were three main components: literature reviews, a fieldwork component where we talked to people who worked in the prison system in Australia. All states and territories agreed to participate except for Tasmania and Western Australia. We ended up being able to do 55 interviews. Staff were from all different levels of the correction system and from all sectors, so disability, health, Indigenous and corrections. We then catalogued the assessment tools used. We analysed responses using process maps and behavioural engineering analysis. And then the final component was the community consultations, which I'll describe shortly. So this is just an example of a process map. We use that to describe the prison journey, and it helped to identify any barriers, points of tension, and show the points where assessments might happen. And in reality, there was a lot of flexibility and difference from one prison to another. So it ended up more of a snapshot of that particular prison rather than, this is what happens in the entire jurisdiction. So really broadly, findings, the LIT review showed us that there is a real lack of research actually about the processes used in prisons. So things that prisons are doing are relatively unknown. So this project was sort of quite unique in that way. The fieldwork told us that the prison system is responding to these recent understandings about prisoners with disabilities, but there are barriers to good support, and that's particularly for Indigenous prisoners. There was a lot of variability around the identification methods, but generally there's a real lack of culturally appropriate methods. High reliance on self-report was seen as problematic culturally because people might not feel safe to disclose. And of course, in many cases, people aren't even aware that they might have a cognitive problem, for example. Also, culture and disability needs were not well integrated. So responses to disability typically don't consider culture, and vice versa. The cultural supports and programs aren't designed to meet the needs of someone with cognitive or other disabilities. There was a shortage of space in specialist disability units. So while those units may have been fabulous, they weren't available to many people. When we did the project, it was sort of in transition around the NDIS, and there was a lot of confusion regarding NDIS and its intersection with the prison system. And this caused blockages, delays in the way prisoners with disability were supported, and also problems with transition planning were highlighted. So we took all of those learnings from the literature and the fieldwork interviews out to community nationally, and we asked people what they thought needed to be done to better support this group. The consultations were heavily impacted by COVID. We had great plans, but we ended up having to cut back on the number of consultations we could do. Still happy we were able to get 11 done with a total of 84 participants. These included elders, community advocates, people working in disability and criminal justice, and people with lived experience of disability or incarceration and their family members. Most participants reported having a family member with prison experience, disability, or both. We used the nominal group technique, and that's a consensus building process where everyone has an opportunity to speak or take turns around the room to put forward your top idea, and until all your ideas have been discussed, so everyone gets to speak, and then the group votes on or awards points to the solutions. And so in that way, at the end of the consultation, we have we know what the top solutions are, and then we sort of did some analysis of that within and across all of the groups, and these are the 7 broad priorities as described by community. So overall, the solutions really emphasise the importance of culture and the need for the tools, the processes and the programs to be culturally developed and culturally led. And this meant things like more holistic assessments, assessments which include the whole story of the person, including family knowledge, and greater access to Indigenous support workers with understanding of disability to integrate the disability needs with the cultural needs. So the highest priority related to culturally safe support in prison, and that included access to more Indigenous staff and cultural activities which were tailored to people's needs and abilities, as well as improved cultural sensitivity in non-Indigenous staff. And the need for continuity of support from reception to reintegration was highlighted. And an idea across a lot of the consultations was for cultural in-reach services to assist with that. So from the community solutions, a set of recommendations were developed. And I can't talk through all of those today, but for people who are interested, there is a summary report of the whole project available on the DSS website. We're also doing an online webinar through the Hopkins Centre, Griffith Uni in September, and that will include a panel discussion around how the recommendations could be implemented in different sectors. Feel free to get in touch with me, Michelle McIntyre, at Synapse if people are interested in that. Thanks so much.
Come on. There we go. Okay, so I'm Molly O'Brien. I'm going to be talking about prisoners with brain injuries. What do we know and what should we do? Now, we already heard from our first presenter about Aboriginal prisoners with brain injuries, and then we heard about some other prisoners who obviously had brain injuries. But what do we actually know about all the prisoners with brain injuries? Because there are a lot of them. And ABI is overrepresented in prison populations. Between 40 and 90% of prisoners in Australia had an ABI in 2019, and that was the most recent data I could find. The rate in general population, so not at this conference, but at the usual general population, is between 2 and 9%. So that's an enormous difference between 40 and 90, 2 and 9. So why are people with ABI overrepresented in prison? Well, you know the answers, you've heard about them. They may have difficulties with balance, impaired sensory functions, motor control, unclear speech, difficulties with insight, problem solving, memory, concentration, aggression, we've heard about that, right? And impulse control, irregular social interactions, mental fatigue. Many, many criminal actions are actually a breakdown of impulse control. Most of the people who don't have a brain injury, if they see that cell phone and they think, I'll just take that, they don't take it because their impulse control kicks in. People with ABI are also highly represented in homelessness, alcohol problems, drug problems, and depression. Now, all of those things may increase the crime rate, but it's not just in Australia. It's in the US, where 50 to 80% of the people in prison have an ABI, 65% in the UK, and 50% in New Zealand. Now, those are the numbers that they're publishing. But, and it may in fact be more than that. But prisoners' traumatic brain injury is more severe than the traumatic brain injury of the general population. The general population has 81% mild TBI, and in the prisoner population, it's 65% mild. In the general population, it's 11% moderate. These are people who have a brain injury. 11% have a moderate TBI, but in the prison population, it's 13%. And 8% of the people with TBI have a severe brain injury, but in prison, it's 13%. So it's not double, but very nearly double. We're talking, is that my thing making a sound? No, very nearly double. So a severe TBI is a TBI that may leave you with lifelong symptoms. Actually, all of these may give rise to lifelong symptoms. And brain injury makes it more likely to be homeless, to have a drug addiction, to have mental illness, depression, to be suicidal, to be aggressive and violent, and to be unemployed. All of those things are possibilities that are more likely. They're not probabilities, but they're more likely possibilities if you have a brain injury. People with a brain injury may also have difficulty accessing legal aid. Now, we heard from the previous speaker how this one guy who had a brain injury or had some kind of mental impairment was just going to plead guilty because his lawyer told him to. Well, he was lucky to get a lawyer. You have to fill out papers. You have to show up to get a lawyer. People with a brain injury may have difficulty accessing legal aid. They may not ask for it, request it, fill out the right paperwork. They may have restricted understanding about how to exercise their rights. They may not know what it means to plead guilty. Even if they are told, they may forget by the time they walk into the court what they've been told about it. They've been told plead guilty. Well, I've also been told that I should follow directions, right? So they don't know how to assert their own rights. They may not know. And they may have difficulty comprehending court procedures. Now, all of us, including me, and I've been a law teacher since 1995. I've taught law in universities since 1995, and I still have difficulty comprehending court procedures. What is going on? What is the judge talking about? What is the prosecutor talking about? I thought it was really good that the individual understood that the prosecutor was the one trying to put him in the shit and the defense lawyer was the one trying to get him out of the shit. That's really a clear understanding. But not everybody has that. And the court procedures may not be so simple as putting you in the shit and getting you out of the shit. The court may say you can have bail if you show up weekly to be drug tested, or you stay out of this person's 100 meters of this person's area, or you report daily to a probation officer or something. You can even write that down for a brain-injured person, and they won't understand it. And if you just tell them, they might just forget it. If you tell them you have a court date in July on the 12th at 10 p.m., on the 12th of July, they've forgotten that completely, and a warrant for their arrest goes out, and they're dragged in, and the judge says, you failed to appear, your bail is revoked, and you're going to jail. And the person with a brain injury says, huh? What did I do? You failed to appear. Well, that is on top of the fact that people with brain injuries may have poor impulse control and or aggression that gets them into trouble. How am I doing on time? Oh, I've got lots of time. Come on, I got lots of time. So what should we do? And this is the important part of my talk here. We need to have better diagnosis and identification of people with brain injuries. We need to have that early, and we need to have support for people with ABI. I've heard today about various kinds of treatments that can be engaged in with people who are living years after their brain injury and still have challenging behaviors. They still can't go into a cafe because they want to assault somebody. What? You know, why do you need to assault somebody? That behavior can be changed with positive feedback and practice. You can get a brain injured person to figure out what it is that makes them want to assault somebody. You can give them mango body butter before they go to a cafe. You're laughing, but that was the example that was given. Mango body butter made that guy relaxed, and then he didn't have to beat somebody up when he went into Bunnings. You know, you'd think that these things would be figured out, but right now they're not. And police and defense lawyers need training in how to improve in ABI literacy and how to deal with clients who have a brain injury. I practiced criminal law in the U.S., and I had several clients who were insane. Did I know what to do with them? No. I just tried to keep them out of jail as much as possible. But I didn't use any techniques that I've learned here or since I had a brain injury. And there's so many things that you can do to get people to show up in court and to figure out what they need out of the system, how they can improve their chances of not getting arrested again. And I should stop. Anyway, we need a more therapeutic approach to their time in prison. We now know that things can be done for treatment for people with brain injuries long after the brain injury, and they can learn to control their aggressive and assaultive behavior. Sometimes they can't, but sometimes they can. And right now, we're not even trying. We don't even know. They have started testing people in prison to find out if they're brain injured, and there are a couple of papers about that. And first we need more brain injury prevention. We need protection against domestic violence and diagnosis of TBI in children and in adults, and drug and alcohol prevention, abuse prevention programs. But even after we get all that in order, if somebody is suspected of committing a crime, they should be screened for a brain injury. We should know whether they have a brain injury. Right now, we don't. And they may not have been properly diagnosed ever. They may not know they've had a brain injury. And there's this problem called anosognosia. That's where people with a brain injury deny that they have a brain injury. And if they acknowledge they have a brain injury, they deny that they have a problem with it. And they don't acknowledge that there's any problem with them. It's all the outside world is just messing me up. And they don't know what they're doing about it. And so the outside people do need to know. And currently there's no screening being done by the Australian police, and screening is not available for defense lawyers and only a few jails and prisons. So do it. And how am I doing on time? I've got 1 more minute. Hold yourself back. I've had a brain injury. I can be aggressive here. The irony is that a lot of people with undiagnosed brain injury may self-represent in court. And the number of incarcerated people with unidentified acquired brain injury are increasing, and they may not be able to comply with sentencing orders or be able to desist from further offending. So they might just go on offending. And there can be help available. So undiagnosed, unscreened people might not be referred for special programs. They might forget their court dates. They might not raise the important issues. And even if we knew a Melbourne prison special service provider said there is no special unit for any like ABI clients and no programs that I can think of that are specifically designed for ABI prisoners, not off the top of my head. Now, this is in contrast to some other countries where if you're arrested and you've had a brain injury, you are assigned a caseworker who will get you to court. They'll come to your house and they'll say, "You have a court date today. Let's go." And that is what is necessary, because you could tell me and tell me and tell me that I have a court date on the 14th of July, and I would forget it and forget it and forget it and find something else to do. So you need a special program to specifically assist accused people who have a brain injury. They need... I know.
I was just going to say, I don't want to cut into your book launch, and
I know.
I just don't take this question the wrong way. But how many steps are there?
I have no idea. I did this a long time ago.
And say now that there is a classic case of a person using their brain injury,
using that brain injury for advantage. I have no idea how many steps, but one is to screen the brain injured people and then give them some help. And brain injury even happens in prison. And I have some stories here about brain injuries. That guy was assaulted in his prison cell. Now, that's not good. So we have a lot of problems with brain injuries in prison. And we have somebody here who works in a prison with brain injured people. Yeah, she's laughing at me. We have a lot of problems, don't we?
We do, absolutely.
Okay, so I'm not overstating it, am I?
No, but you are over time.
I'm going to tell you that we need support and treatment for people with ABI, and they need to have access to treatments by Medicare. Right now, they're not allowed them. And that's all I wanted to say. But before you go, and before you say anything, Nick, I want to thank Professor Simon Rice for coming down here. He is going to be the speaker at the launch of my book. And I will...
It's over there.
Here's the book. And so you have to go out and get tea and do it fast.
Okay.
So that you can come back and hear Simon talk about how wonderful this book is.
There are genuinely few people in this world about whom you can say they're beyond compare. Molly is one of them. So her next conference appearance is in Las Vegas.
He's making...